So this week we read another huge section of the Postmortal. We jumped ahead 28 years, and a lot has happened. I think a big difference between the jump between section 1 and section 2 and the jump between section 2 and section 3 is it seems like the world has shifted a great deal, right? Section 1 and section 2, it seems like, okay, people are getting in the groove of this new life. We see shifts in the economy. People are making life decisions a little differently, right? But now, wow, have we been feeling effects just with the societal structure and what people are getting out of life. Okay, so here are some things that I would encourage us to think about, right? I've set up discussion questions for y'all, so obviously engage with those, but here are some things that I get out of section 3. First off, this is kind of consistent throughout the whole text, but one of the things that I think McGarry is suggesting, a big shift that is connected with the cure, and when I teach Should We Try to Live Forever in an Ethics of Tech class, I think this is something that resonates with a whole bunch of people. The nature of our social commitments seem really tied to the structure of our life and how we conceive of the narrative of our lives, right? So taking the cure means that how we conceive of aging and the shape of how we conceive of our death just is really shaken, right? So what it means to have a romantic relationship is really different. What it means to have a parent-child relationship is really different, right? Right now, we think that when we're middle-aged, we have a particular picture of what our parents will look like, what kind of shape they'll be in, and what our caretaking roles are like, right? So a number of you have noted already, like the first part of our lives, parents have the role of caretaker typically, and the second part we might have a reversal there. With the cure in place, what does that even mean? One of the kind of stranger things is that parents and children might have the same cure age, and so now generations are kind of just coming up and being 30 forever. Okay, so one thing also, though, it seems like a lot of decision making is kind of strange, to me at least, and I wonder what y'all think about this, right? So our main character, John, seems really allergic to romantic relationships, and we have a lot of choice over those. We have a certain amount of choice about reproduction, but what kind of commitment is that, right? So our main character has some ideas about commitment, and we often think about that in the romantic relationship realm. He's making some choices about his parental role. What kind of things are coming up with the parental role with the cure in place? So I mentioned it shifting what kind of relationship structure we might expect for parents and children, but we've talked a bit about, and you guys are bringing out in your discussions, that marriage just kind of doesn't seem the same, right? So cycle marriages are coming about. You don't really have the structure of like growing old together. But having a child seems also like this indefinite commitment. What kind of commitment is having a child if you never die? And if the child might just have a cure age of 25 to 35 and then just be fine forever? Do you still have this indefinite commitment to your child forever, right? Some of you were mentioning the father's aid wanting not a family tree, but a family rainforest. What does that even look like, right? We get that one glimpse of someone who has a child positive view, a family positive view, but that's not really John's lens through looking at the world. So we don't get very many people who have that perspective. So that's one thing to maybe think about, the varieties of interpersonal commitment that might shift because of the cure, right? We've, from my perspective, officially hit dystopia in this section. So what are the values or practices that might be going awry here, right? So earlier in the semester, one proposition on the table is in order for something to be a dystopia, there's some kind of thing being presented by the author that's being not valued correctly, or a value that's being understood in the wrong way. So one proposal might be that our main character is not valuing human relationship correctly, and maybe the cure is causing that, or we saw him before he got the cure. What's going on with this main character? Are we just seeing him, he's a regular person, everything's fine, and this is just the world going wrong, is the society we're being presented with going awry because the cure is twisting values that were being valued fine, like commitments or life and death and stuff like that. So with this section, I'm going to encourage us to start analyzing this as dystopia, right? What is going awry? Can we identify a value that is either being misapplied or misunderstood in this section? So one maybe candidate for that is commitment or relationship. That's maybe one thing to think about. Another really strong candidate is life and death, right? Or aging. This kind of hopefully pretty straightforward and obvious, right? The cure for aging is changing how we can relate to death, right? From that first section on, while John was debating whether to get the cure, he was like, well, it hit him that what he's avoiding is not death. What he's avoiding is a natural death, right? So now we're considering the different aspects of suicide, the different choices now you have to relate to death, right? His dad died of cancer. There's just not going to be a natural death available to you anymore. So I have a few quotes. And I don't know how to get to them. Hey, yay, okay. So I have a few quotes to maybe suggest in section 3, the valuing of death and life going really awry, right? So in section 2, there was maybe an irony coming through where all these people had taken the cure and yet death was everywhere, right? So there was this dramatic irony going on where everybody's kind of afraid of death and so they're taking the cure, maybe is an interpretation. You could have a different one. So there's this dramatic irony in section 2. In section 3, a few instances, a few quotes, a few ruminations are suggesting that maybe life is being just completely devalued. Here are some quotes. I think maybe they're even in order, maybe. So on page 194, end specialization is the single most unethical American enterprise since slavery. I'm all for population control, but what is unacceptable to me is how the government can endorse subsidized suicide. So even in this condemnation of end specialization as a career, the speaker is still all for population control, right? So there's this background value here of controlling population. So the different controversies around suicide being government subsidized, what kind of value do we have of suicide just separate from that? And then end specialization as a career could be very evaluated and interpreted. On that same page, 194, there are 720 million people in this country right now. If we don't get a firm handle on our population, which is spinning wildly out of control, nature will be more than happy to assume command for us. So we could interpret this as not valuing individual human lives, right? In discussions of population control, it's very easy to just stop valuing individuals and instead look at systems and want to get rid of a lot of people. So in just framing population control and worry about resources as a desire to just get rid of people instead of trying to resolve resource issues and things like this. Trying to think about what concerns of a population control suggest or assume, I think is a really important question. In my environmental ethics class, for example, when we talk about the problem of sustainability, framing that issue as there are too many humans is actually really morally problematic. So there just isn't enough interest or will to develop sustainable ways of living, and the amount of industrial money and support that is divorced from making lives worth living actually frames a lot of the issue of overpopulation. That's not something that comes across in this text at all, and I think that's interesting. On page 199, here's a quote: "People are endangering the entire planet simply by sitting there and being. What I am doing is providing the only jolt of reality left. Everyone thinks they can't die now. Well, they can, and they will. So there's a lot of rationalization that John provides us in this section, right? He's adopted this life and this job, and he's presenting it as the only possible answer. So especially when we get to this section, I'd like us to consider what we've learned about John as a character and how much of his perspective is coloring what we're learning about the world and what the reasonable thing is, right? He's got a perspective. We saw him unraveling at the end of section 2. He might be having a reasonable reaction to the world. I don't mean to discount that, right? The world's gone very wonky at this point. But let's think about how we've learned things about John, and what kind of things we are learning about the world through John's eyes. What kind of things have we not been hearing about the world because we're getting a character's perspective on it. Okay, on 195, no one ever figured out how many people perished or how the fire began. No one cared. That's how cheap life is now. We get a surplus and we burn it off. So with these